I'm Adam Roberts, the South Asia Bureau Chief of The Economist, and in this year's Christmas issue we have an article about the mother-in-law in India, the changing role of the Indian mother-in-law. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Veena Venugopal, the author of a book, The Mother-in-Law, The Other Woman in Your Marriage. Let's begin with the Indian society, the mother-in-law, and the role that the mother-in-law plays in society, and whether that role is changing.
Well, the mother-in-law is still as prominent a figure in the Indian marriage as she always was. However, the conflict between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law has only gotten worse. And one of the reasons for this is that while the rest of the country has progressed in a way since the economic liberalization of the 90s, and with being exposed to global ideas of how relationships work and how and opportunities and education and career. So in a sense, the Indian mother has progressed, but the Indian mother-in-law has still stayed the same. So when they get a daughter-in-law into the family, they're not sure as to where they should draw the line and how far they should allow this educated, progressive girl to be herself, and how close they should reel them into what they think are important family traditions and cultures. So the conflict sadly has worsened because there is a generation of mothers-in-law who don't know how to deal with these progressive, educated, and sometimes, as they think, wild daughters-in-law.
So maybe we could talk about the role of the mother-in-law traditionally in society. A young woman, when she got married, maybe only 10 or 12 years old, would move into a joint family, a large family, her husband quite a lot older than her. The young woman would come into a bigger family and be met by this strong, dominant, older woman who would control her life. And the young woman would gradually move her way up from being almost a servant in the household, very, very weak and submissive to an older woman, and then in her life would become stronger and eventually become a strong mother-in-law herself. Now, is that pattern continuing in Indian society today?
It does, sadly, and it's not even just in rural India amongst large families. It is even in urban, educated Indian households. I was surprised by the many sort of common traits that I found in the among the daughters-in-law I spoke to, and it is really shocking that the mother-in-law tries to control how the daughter-in-law dresses, and B, and these are the clear two areas that stood out in urban India. And the second one was whether they would have a career after they're married or not. And I think the idea is that is to keep the daughter-in-law at home, where she can be controlled, where you sort of are constantly casting an eye on her. And there was this girl who I feature in the book, called Anshika, who lives in a modern Bombay apartment with a modern, normal, regular family. So one of the first conditions that the mother-in-law laid down was that you will have to quit your job. And she told her in these many words, and this is a 27-year-old girl, I want you to cook, I want you to clean, I want you to stay at home, I want you to do. And she said yes, 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 yes to all of these because, and that was a mistake that I think that is a mistake that a lot of daughters-in-law make, that they agree to all the conditions before the wedding, thinking that, somehow these rules will slacken over time. And so both parties end up feeling a little cheated. So it's shocking. It's not just in rural India that the daughter-in-law is brought in as a maid. It's even today in urban India, in educated families.
Now, when I travel out of Delhi, out of Mumbai, out of the cities, one of the things I always see is these rising tower blocks, these great concrete structures coming up with two-bedroom apartments being built for thousands of families. And these apartments are not for the joint extended family. These are two-bedroom apartments for a couple and a baby. No room in there for the mother-in-law. Are we seeing now in India a transition from a period of joint families, big families, and these large households with different generations to a new period where there's less tension between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law?
I hope so. My advice to daughters-in-law after doing the research that I did for the book is to find a home as far away as possible from the mother-in-law. And I think research backs it up. There is a study in Italy which showed that for every 100 yards that you put between yourself and your mother-in-law, the chances of your marriage being happy go up. So it is incredibly necessary to live away so that you can be the person that you are without living a life that someone is forcing on you, because that is a really unnatural way to live. One of the daughters-in-law I talked to told me that every time there was a problem, she tried to correct herself and she would do everything that her mother-in-law expects her to do. But how long can you be someone else? So in 3 months, she will sort of fall back on her ways and she will become who she is, and then the issue comes up again.
So one of the reasons perhaps why the tension was so great within the family for women is that outside in the public space, women didn't have much power. Women in Indian society don't have much say over the economy and politics and so on. And that might be one reason why inside the family there's all the extra tension, because that's the only arena where women are really in charge. Now, do you think that maybe as Indian society changes and women get more power in general, that will allow things to improve inside the family and tension to reduce between the mothers-in-law and their daughters?
I think it has worked in the opposite way, that yes, Indian society has become better for women, and therefore the tensions in the family have increased. So whereas somebody in a new daughter-in-law in the 70s or the 80s would have submitted herself willingly to be told by her mother-in-law as to what she should wear and what time she should wake up and what she should do in the house, the 24-year-old or the 26-year-old who's getting married today is not. Because she's worked, she's traveled a little bit, and she knows her mind. So she's not going to take to anyone sort of controlling her life. To my mind, this generation and the next generation are the transitional generations in the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law dynamic in India, and things are only going to get much worse before they get better.
Well, Veena, thank you very much for taking us for a guide through the world of the Indian mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law. And I could only recommend to everyone read your book.